Welcome back, everyone. We're glad to have you here with us. Tonight, we're traveling to a place that exists on no tourist maps, where the desert holds secrets older than the Cold War itself, Groom Lake. You know it by another name, but tonight we're going back to the beginning, before the fences, before the legends, before the world knew to look up at those empty Nevada skies. What makes a patch of dried lake bed so important that it's been sealed off from the world for over half a century? Why does this particular stretch of nothing draw more attention than almost anywhere else on Earth? You decide. Share your thoughts in the comments. Now, let's step into the mystery that started it all. Chapter 1. The Lake That Dried Up. Long before there were fences, long before there were secrets, long before anyone looked up at the Nevada sky and wondered what moved behind those distant mountains, there was water. Imagine standing where Groom Lake rests today, but instead of seeing a flat expanse of white alkali dust, you're looking across the surface of a massive freshwater lake. The water stretches for miles in every direction, fed by streams cascading down from the surrounding peaks. Fish swim in its depths, birds nest along its shores. This is Groom Lake, as it existed for thousands of years, a thriving ecosystem in what would one day become America's most mysterious desert. That was roughly 10,000 years ago, when the climate was different and the Great Basin held dozens of such lakes. Geologists call this period the Pleistocene, the final chapter of the last ice age. Nevada wasn't the arid landscape we know today. It was cooler, wetter, and green. The lake that would eventually become Groom Lake was part of a vast network of interconnected water bodies, some larger than modern Lake Tahoe. But climates change. As the ice age ended and temperatures rose, the delicate balance that sustained these lakes began to shift. Rain became scarce. Snowpack in the mountains dwindled. One by one, the streams that fed the lakes slowed to a trickle, then stopped altogether. The water began to evaporate faster than it could be replaced. This process took millennia. It wasn't a sudden catastrophe, but a gradual retreat. Each year, the shoreline receded a little further. Each summer, more lakebed was exposed to the desert Sunday. The fish died off. The birds moved on. What remained was a flat basin, perfectly level, coated with the mineral deposits left behind by countless years of evaporation. Those mineral deposits are the key to understanding what makes Groom Lake so unique. As the ancient water evaporated, it left behind layers of salt, gypsum, and other alkali compounds. Over time, these formed a hard, cement-like surface that could support tremendous weight without cracking or shifting. Geologists call this type of formation a playa, and Groom Lake is one of the finest examples in North America. The surface is remarkably smooth. When surveyors first measured it in the 1950s, they found variations of only inches across areas spanning miles. No grading, no construction, no human intervention could have created something so perfectly flat. Nature had done the work, grinding and polishing the lakebed through countless wet and dry cycles until it resembled a giant concrete pad. But it's not just the flatness that makes Groom Lake special. It's the hardness. The alkali crust can support aircraft weighing hundreds of thousands of pounds without leaving so much as a tire mark. During the dry season, which lasts most of the year, the surface is harder than many paved runways. When the rare Nevada rains do come, the water runs off quickly, leaving the playa ready for use within hours. The size is equally impressive. The main lakebed spans roughly 3.5 miles from north to south and nearly 2 miles from east to west. That's enough space to land aircraft from any direction, regardless of wind conditions. Conventional airports need multiple runways to handle different wind patterns. At Groom Lake, the entire surface is a runway. This combination of size, hardness, and flatness exists in very few places on Earth. Most dry lakes are either too small, too soft, or too uneven for aircraft operations. Some have obstacles like rocks or vegetation. Others flood regularly or remain muddy for months after rain. Groom Lake has none of these problems. It's as if nature designed it specifically for aviation, thousands of years before humans learned to fly. The surrounding geography adds another layer of perfection. Mountains ring the lakebed on all sides, creating natural barriers that block views from ground level. From most directions, you can't see the lakebed until you're practically on top of it. The few gaps between peaks are miles away, too distant for casual observation. Any activity on the lakebed remains invisible to the outside world. Even the climate contributes to its suitability. The high desert environment means minimal fog, few storms, and excellent visibility most days of the year. Winds are generally predictable, and the dry air provides ideal conditions for testing aircraft performance. Moisture, the enemy of sensitive equipment, is rarely a concern. For thousands of years after the ancient lake dried up, this remarkable natural airfield sat empty. Native American tribes occasionally passed through but rarely lingered in the harsh environment. Early European explorers noted the strange white expanse on their maps but found little reason to investigate. Miners in the 1800s staked a few claims in the surrounding hills but ignored the barren lakebed itself. It remained virtually untouched until the middle of the 20th century, when a small group of engineers and intelligence officers flew over it in a military transport plane. Looking down at that perfect white surface, surrounded by protective mountains and far from any populated area, they realized they had found something extraordinary. Not just a dry lake, not just another patch of Nevada desert, but the ideal foundation for secrets that would change the world. In the next chapter, we'll meet the first people to call this desolate place home, long before it became the most restricted airspace in America. Chapter 2. First Footprints in the Alkali. The white expanse of the dried lakebed holds more than mineral deposits. If you know where to look, you can still find traces of the first people who walked across its surface, their footsteps pressed into mud that hardened under the desert sun centuries ago. Long before European explorers crossed the Great Basin, Native American tribes understood this place in ways that maps and surveys could never capture. The southern Paiute called the broader region home, following ancient paths between water sources and seasonal hunting grounds. To them, Groom Lake wasn't empty desert. It was part of a living landscape with its own spirit and purpose. The tribes spoke of the lake in whispers, not from fear exactly, but from respect. They believed certain places held power that shouldn't be disturbed carelessly. The vast white circle where an ancient lake once lived was one of those places. They would cross it when necessary, following established routes that skirted the edges rather than cutting directly across the center. Some tribal stories suggest they saw strange lights dancing above the lakebed on certain nights, though what those lights might have been is lost to time. Water was life in the desert, and even after the lake dried up, the area retained traces of underground springs and seasonal pools. The Paiute knew where to find these hidden water sources during long journeys. They left markers, subtle signs that would guide other travelers to safety. Some of these markers, carefully arranged stones and scratched symbols on rock faces, can still be found in the hills surrounding the lakebed today. The first Europeans to document the area arrived in the 1840s, part of government survey expeditions mapping the American West. They noted the strange white expanse in their journals, describing it as a curiosity but little more. The harsh environment offered nothing they wanted: no gold, no timber, no farmable soil, just endless alkali dust and punishing heat. But by the 1860s, everything changed. Gold and silver strikes throughout Nevada brought thousands of prospectors into the desert. Most headed for established mining districts, like the Comstock Lode, but a few hardy souls ventured into remote areas, following rumors and hunches into places no one else wanted to go. The mountains surrounding Groom Lake contained traces of valuable minerals not enough for a major mining operation, but sufficient to support small claims and the occasional lucky strike. Miners with names like Tom Wilson and Jake Henderson staked claims in the hills, building rough cabins and digging shafts into the rocky slopes. They were isolated, independent men who preferred the solitude of the desert to the chaos of crowded mining camps. These early settlers faced challenges that would defeat most people. Water had to be hauled from distant springs or collected during the brief rainy season. Food came from supply runs to distant towns, or whatever could be hunted in the sparse landscape. The nearest neighbour might be 20 miles away across trackless desert. Summers brought temperatures that could kill, while winter nights dropped below freezing. Yet, some persisted. Small ranching operations emerged, taking advantage of scattered water sources and hardy desert grasses. The Sheehan family established a ranch near the southern edge of what would become the restricted zone. They raised cattle, maintained a small alfalfa field, and operated a way station for travelers crossing the desert. Their property included buildings, corrals, and a small cemetery where family members were laid to rest in the shadow of the mountains. But there was something about this place that seemed to resist permanent settlement. Mines played out faster than expected. Wells went dry without warning. Equipment failed more often than it should have. The few families who tried to establish lasting homesteads found themselves fighting not just the harsh environment, but a series of inexplicable setbacks that drove them away. One story, passed down through local families, tells of a miner who claimed his compass wouldn't work properly near the lakebed. The needle would spin wildly or point in directions that made no sense. He attributed it to mineral deposits in the surrounding rocks, but other miners in similar terrain never reported such problems. Eventually, he abandoned his claim and moved to a more conventional mining district. Ranchers told similar stories. Cattle would refuse to graze in certain areas near the lakebed, even when grass was available. Horses became skittish for no apparent reason. Experienced desert dwellers, people who could read the land like a book, sometimes found themselves disoriented in places that should have been familiar. The railroad boom of the late 1800s brought survey crews through the area, mapping potential routes across the desert. They noted Groom Lake on their charts as a prominent landmark, but railroad lines went elsewhere. The harsh terrain and lack of water sources made it unsuitable for major transportation corridors. By the early 1900s, most of the original mining claims had been abandoned. The easy gold was gone, and the cost of extracting what remained exceeded its value. Ranchers consolidated into larger operations or moved to areas with more reliable water. The desert began to reclaim the cabins, mine shafts, and equipment left behind. A few stubborn souls remained. The Sheehan Ranch continued operating into the 1950s, becoming a landmark known to pilots flying between California and Nevada. Mary Sheehan, one of the last residents, knew every trail and water source for miles around. She watched the desert reclaim the abandoned mines and welcomed the occasional traveler who needed directions or supplies. But even she noticed changes in the final years. Military aircraft began appearing overhead with increasing frequency. Strange sounds echoed across the desert at night. Vehicles were spotted moving along distant ridges where no roads existed on any map. The solitude that had defined this place for generations was slowly giving way to something else entirely. The Native Americans had been right about one thing: this was a place of power, a location where the ordinary rules didn't always apply. They had chosen to respect that power and keep their distance. The miners and ranchers who followed tried to impose their will on the landscape and found themselves defeated by forces they couldn't understand or control. Soon, new visitors would arrive with resources and determination far exceeding anything the desert had seen before. They would succeed where others had failed, but only by embracing the isolation and secrecy that seemed to define this strange corner of Nevada. In the next chapter, we'll meet the men who looked at this empty expanse and saw the perfect hiding place for the future. Chapter 3, When the Military Discovered Paradise. The year was 1954, and America had a problem. The Soviet Union was building weapons behind an iron curtain, developing capabilities that could shift the balance of the Cold War. Traditional intelligence gathering wasn't enough. The CIA needed eyes-in-the-sky aircraft that could fly higher and see farther than anything in existence. Enter Clarence Kelly Johnson, the legendary aircraft designer from Lockheed's Skunk Works division. Johnson had built some of the fastest planes in the world, but this project demanded something entirely different. The aircraft he was designing, codenamed the U-2, would need to cruise at altitudes above 70,000 feet, far beyond the reach of Soviet interceptors. It would be a spy plane unlike any other, built for a mission that couldn't exist on any official record. But where could such a revolutionary aircraft be tested in complete secrecy? The challenge wasn't just technical, it was geographical. The plane would need a remote location, far from prying eyes and Soviet satellites. The facility would require perfect flying weather, unlimited airspace, and natural barriers to block ground-level observation. Most importantly, it needed to be completely off the public radar. Johnson and his team began an exhaustive search across the American West. They flew reconnaissance missions over hundreds of potential sites, measuring runways, evaluating terrain, and assessing security considerations. Each location had drawbacks. Some were too close to populated areas. Others lacked adequate runway space or suffered from unpredictable weather patterns. Many were already in use by other military units, making secrecy impossible. Weeks passed with no suitable candidate. The U-2 program was moving forward rapidly, but without a secure testing facility, the entire project could be compromised. Pressure mounted from Washington to find a solution quickly. Then, in the spring of 1955, Johnson's search plane banked over a mountain ridge in southern Nevada, and everything changed. Spread out below was Groom Lake, its white alkali surface gleaming under the desert Sunday. Johnson looked down at that perfect natural runway, surrounded by protective mountains and miles from any settlement, and immediately understood what he was seeing. This wasn't just another potential site. This was paradise. The lake bed checked every box on their requirements list. At over 3 miles long and nearly 2 miles wide, it provided more runway space than any conventional airfield. The hard alkali surface could support aircraft of any size without expensive paving. The surrounding mountains created natural barriers against observation, while the high desert climate offered excellent flying conditions year-round. But perhaps most importantly, Groom Lake was already forgotten. The few mining claims in the area had been abandoned for decades. The nearest town was over 100 miles away. Even experienced Nevada pilots rarely flew over the area, since it lay far from established air routes. For a project that needed to remain invisible, this isolation was priceless. Johnson didn't hesitate. Within hours of spotting the lake bed, he was on the phone to CIA headquarters, recommending immediate acquisition of the site. His report was unequivocal. Groom Lake was not just suitable for the U-2 program, it was perfect. The acquisition process began immediately, though it wasn't without complications. Several parcels of land needed to be purchased or appropriated, including active mining claims and the Sheehan family ranch. The government approached property owners with generous offers, but the transactions had to be completed quickly and quietly to avoid drawing attention. Mary Sheehan, who had lived on her family's ranch for decades, found herself facing an offer she couldn't refuse. Government representatives explained that the military needed her land for classified purposes, but they couldn't reveal specifics. The compensation was fair, even generous, but it meant leaving the only home she had ever known. Other residents faced similar situations. Mining claim holders were bought out, their rights transferred to a government entity that didn't appear on any public records. The few remaining homesteaders received relocation assistance and sworn agreements never to discuss the transactions. Within months, an area that had been home to scattered families for generations was completely empty. The land acquisition created an interesting legal puzzle. The facility couldn't appear on official military records, since its very existence was classified. Instead, ownership was transferred to a CIA front organization, buried within layers of bureaucracy that made it nearly impossible to trace. On paper, Groom Lake belonged to a government agency that didn't exist, operating under authorities that couldn't be acknowledged. With the property secured, construction began almost immediately. The first crews arrived in the summer of 1955, transported by military aircraft to avoid creating road traffic that might draw attention. These weren't ordinary construction workers, but specially cleared personnel who had signed extensive secrecy agreements before learning their destination. The initial construction was deliberately minimal. A single runway was graded along the lakebed's longest axis, though the natural surface was already adequate for aircraft operations. Basic hangar facilities were erected using prefabricated materials flown in from other bases. Living quarters, maintenance shops, and administrative buildings followed a strictly functional design with no unnecessary features. Everything was built with concealment in mind. Structures were painted in desert camouflage colours that blended with the surrounding terrain. Vehicle movements were restricted to designated areas that wouldn't create visible tracks from aerial observation. Even construction waste was carefully managed to avoid leaving traces that might be spotted by reconnaissance flights. The project moved with remarkable speed. Within 6 months, Groom Lake had been transformed from an empty desert basin into a fully operational, though highly secretive, air base. The facility had no official name, no listed address, and no acknowledgement of its existence in any public document. Workers referred to it simply as the site or the ranch. By late 1955, the facility was ready for its first classified aircraft. The U-2 program was about to begin test flights from the most secret airfield in America. Kelly Johnson had found his paradise, and the CIA had found the perfect hiding place for operations that couldn't exist. But as the first U-2 prototype was prepared for its inaugural flight over Groom Lake, none of the participants could have imagined how their secret airfield would eventually capture the world's imagination. They were building a test facility for spy planes, not knowing they were creating the foundation for America's greatest modern mystery. Chapter 4. The secret airfield takes shape. The first construction truck rolled across Groom Lake's alkali surface on a scorching July morning in 1955. Behind it came a convoy of vehicles carrying materials, equipment, and men who had signed papers promising they would never speak of where they were going or what they would build. Building a secret airfield in the Nevada desert presented challenges no construction manual had ever addressed. Every decision, from the placement of buildings to the color of paint, had to consider one overriding factor: invisibility. This wasn't just about constructing facilities. It was about creating an entire military base that officially didn't exist. The first challenge was logistics. Groom Lake sat in the middle of nowhere, connected to civilization by dirt roads that hadn't seen maintenance in decades. Heavy equipment needed to reach the site without creating obvious traffic patterns that might be noticed by passing aircraft or curious locals. The solution was airlift. Massive cargo planes landed directly on the lake bed, delivering prefabricated materials and specialized equipment that couldn't be trucked in safely. Workers watched C-1-19 and C-1-24 transport aircraft touch down on the natural runway, their wheels raising clouds of alkali dust that hung in the still desert air. These planes carried more than construction supplies. They brought the first hints of what Groom Lake would become, a place where the impossible happened routinely, where aircraft appeared and vanished without explanation. The runway came first, though calling it construction overstates the effort required. Nature had already provided a landing strip superior to most conventional airports. Engineers simply marked the optimal path across the lake bed's longest axis, installed basic lighting for night operations, and declared it operational. The natural surface was harder than concrete and perfectly flat across its entire length. Hangar construction proved more complex. The buildings needed to shelter aircraft from weather and prying eyes while remaining as inconspicuous as possible from aerial observation. The solution was a series of low-profile structures, painted in desert camouflage colors that blended seamlessly with the surrounding terrain. From above, the hangars appeared to be natural features of the landscape, their shapes broken up with paint schemes that confused the eye. Inside these hangars, workers installed specialized equipment for aircraft maintenance and testing. Hydraulic systems, electrical power, compressed air, fuel storage, all the infrastructure needed to support the most advanced spy plane ever built. But everything was designed with portability in mind. If the facility ever needed to be abandoned quickly, critical equipment could be removed without leaving obvious traces. The base required more than hangars. Housing for personnel presented its own security challenges. Workers couldn't be allowed to commute from nearby towns, since there were no nearby towns. They couldn't establish permanent families on site, since the base officially didn't exist. The solution was a temporary camp model that could house essential personnel for extended periods while maintaining the fiction that nothing permanent was being built. Living quarters were Spartan but functional. Prefabricated dormitories housed engineers, pilots, and maintenance crews in shared accommodations that resembled military barracks more than civilian housing. A dining facility, recreation area, and basic medical clinic rounded out the essential services. Everything was built to minimum standards, reinforcing the idea that this was a temporary operation that could be dismantled at a moment's notice. Water presented a critical challenge. The ancient lakebed had no natural water sources, and drilling wells might create visible signs of activity. The initial solution was trucking water from distant sources, but this proved unsustainable for a permanent facility. Eventually, engineers located underground water sources in the surrounding hills and installed a discrete pipeline system that brought fresh water to the base without creating obvious surface traces. Power generation required similar innovation. Diesel generators provided electricity for essential operations, but their noise and exhaust could potentially be detected from significant distances in the still desert air. Sound dampening systems reduced generator noise, while exhaust was carefully managed to minimize visible emissions that might be spotted by aircraft. Communication with the outside world demanded the highest security measures. Radio transmissions could be intercepted and traced, potentially exposing the base's location and activities. A dedicated landline connection was installed, running underground through the surrounding mountains to connect with secure government communication networks. Even routine administrative communication was treated as classified material. The workforce itself required careful management. Every person who set foot on Groom Lake underwent extensive background investigations and signed comprehensive secrecy agreements. They were transported to the site on unmarked aircraft, often with windows blocked to prevent them from identifying landmarks during flight. Once on site, movement was strictly controlled to ensure no individual had access to information beyond what their specific job required. Living conditions were deliberately austere. This wasn't just about cost saving, it was about psychology. The isolation, discomfort, and strict security measures reinforced the temporary nature of their assignment and the serious consequences of security breaches. Workers understood that they were participating in something extraordinary, but they also understood that speaking about it could end their careers or worse. Despite these challenges, construction proceeded rapidly. The combination of unlimited funding, high priority status, and motivated workforce overcame obstacles that would have stopped conventional projects. By late summer of 1955, less than 4 months after the first truck crossed the lakebed, Groom Lake had been transformed into a fully operational airfield. The speed of construction was matched only by its effectiveness in maintaining secrecy. Aerial reconnaissance of the area showed little change from previous years. The new structures blended so well with the natural terrain that they were nearly invisible from above. Ground-level observation was impossible due to the surrounding mountains and vast distances to any public land. As autumn arrived in 1955, the final preparations were underway. The runway was operational, the hangars complete, and the support infrastructure ready. All that remained was the arrival of the aircraft that would justify this massive undertaking. The U-2 spy plane was about to make its first flight from the most secret airfield in America. Chapter 5: The U-2 Dragon Lady's Secret Home. On a clear morning in August 1955, the first U-2 spy plane touched down on Groom Lake's alkali surface, its impossibly long wings flexing in the desert thermals. To the handful of personnel watching from the hangar, It looked less like an aircraft than a dark angel, all graceful curves and otherworldly proportions. The U-2 was unlike any plane that had come before it. Kelly Johnson's team at Lockheed Skunk Works had created an aircraft that could climb to altitudes above 70,000 feet, higher than any fighter could reach, higher than most people believed powered flight was possible. Its wings stretched 80 feet from tip to tip, yet the entire aircraft weighed less than many cars. It was built for one purpose: to fly over the Soviet Union and photograph military installations that no Western observer had ever seen. But first, it needed to be tested in absolute secrecy. Every aspect of the U-2's performance had to be evaluated without revealing its existence to Soviet intelligence, or for that matter, to most of the American government. Groom Lake provided the perfect laboratory for this impossible aircraft. The early test flights revealed just how revolutionary the U-2 truly was. Climbing at a steep angle that would stall conventional aircraft, it would disappear into the bright blue sky until even the experienced test pilots on the ground lost sight of it. At maximum altitude, the plane flew in conditions that resembled space more than the atmosphere. The air was so thin that the pilot wore a pressure suit similar to those used by astronauts. The sky above turned deep purple, and the curvature of the Earth became visible on the horizon. These flights took the U-2 over vast stretches of the American West, far beyond the restricted airspace around Groom Lake. The aircraft's extreme altitude made it invisible to ground observers, but it wasn't entirely undetectable. Commercial airline pilots occasionally spotted strange contrails at impossible heights. Radar operators at civilian airports recorded blips that moved too high and too slow to be conventional aircraft. The reports began almost immediately. Airline crews described seeing metallic objects that seemed to hover motionless in the stratosphere. Air traffic controllers noted radar contacts that appeared and vanished without explanation. Most concerning of all, civilian pilots reported close encounters with aircraft that looked nothing like anything in the known inventory of military planes. To the public, these sightings had only one explanation: flying saucers. The 1950s were the beginning of the modern UFO era, and reports of unidentified flying objects were capturing headlines across the country. What the witnesses didn't know was that many of their sightings were actually glimpses of America's most classified aircraft, flying missions that couldn't be acknowledged for decades. The irony wasn't lost on the small group of people who knew the truth. The U-2 program was so secret that even government officials were told to investigate UFO reports seriously, not knowing they were often investigating their own aircraft. Air Force personnel would interview witnesses, file official reports, and launch investigations into sightings of the very plane their own government was testing over their heads. Security at Groom Lake became increasingly sophisticated as the U-2 program expanded. The base established protocols that would become the template for decades of classified aircraft testing. Workers were compartmentalized, with each person knowing only what was necessary for their specific job. Pilots and ground crews were kept in separate areas when not actively working together. Even maintenance records were coded to prevent anyone from assembling a complete picture of the aircraft's capabilities. The test flights themselves followed strict patterns designed to minimize exposure. Most flying occurred during daylight hours when visibility was best for the pilots, but routes were carefully planned to avoid populated areas and known flight paths. When the U-2 did cross commercial air routes, it flew so high that detection was unlikely. The few radar installations capable of tracking objects at such altitudes were mostly military sites whose operators had been briefed not to discuss unusual contacts. But the program wasn't without dangers. The U-2 pushed the boundaries of flight so far that accidents were inevitable. Several early test flights ended in crashes, though fortunately most occurred within the vast restricted area around Groom Lake, where wreckage could be recovered quickly and quietly. Pilots who survived these incidents were sworn to even deeper levels of secrecy, since their experiences revealed details about the aircraft's performance that were among the most closely guarded secrets of the Cold War. The secrecy extended beyond the base itself. Families of personnel stationed at Groom Lake were told only that their relatives were working on a classified project at a location that couldn't be discussed. Mail was routed through cover addresses. Phone calls were monitored. Even medical emergencies had to be handled through special protocols to prevent any connection to the base from appearing in civilian hospital records. As 1955 turned to 1956, the U-2 program achieved its primary objectives. The aircraft systems were tested and refined. Pilots were trained to operate in the thin atmosphere of the stratosphere. Most importantly, the plane proved it could fly deep into Soviet airspace and return with photographs of unprecedented clarity and detail. But the success of the U-2 program had an unexpected consequence. The numerous UFO sightings generated by test flights were creating public interest in unidentified aircraft that made secrecy even more challenging. Government officials found themselves in the odd position of having to deny the existence of flying saucers, while knowing that some UFO reports were actually sightings of their own classified aircraft. The Air Force established Project Blue Book to investigate UFO reports, partly as genuine scientific inquiry, but also as a way to identify and contain sightings of classified aircraft. Officers reviewing Blue Book files could recognize descriptions that matched known test flights and ensure those reports received explanations that didn't compromise security. By late 1956, the U-2 was ready for operational missions. The aircraft that had called Groom Lake home for more than a year was about to begin the spy flights that would define the early Cold War. But the base itself had been transformed by the experience. What started as a temporary testing facility had evolved into America's premier location for evaluating aircraft that pushed the boundaries of what was possible. Chapter 6: Ox Cart and the Fastest Plane Ever Built. The roar that shattered the desert silence on a spring morning in 1962 was unlike anything Groom Lake had ever heard. It wasn't the whistle of the U-2's single engine or the familiar rumble of transport aircraft. This was something primal, a sound that seemed to tear holes in the very fabric of the sky. The source of that sound was the most radical aircraft ever conceived, the A-12, code-named Ox Cart. If the U-2 had pushed the boundaries of high-altitude flight, the Ox Cart obliterated every previous concept of what an airplane could be. This wasn't just faster than anything that had come before. It was faster than anything most engineers believed was possible. Kelly Johnson's team at Lockheed had outdone themselves. The Ox Cart could cruise at Mach 3.3, more than 3 times the speed of sound. At that velocity, the aircraft's skin heated to temperatures that would melt conventional materials. The leading edges glowed cherry red from friction with the atmosphere. Flying the Ox Cart wasn't aviation in any traditional sense. It was controlled meteorology, hurtling through the sky at speeds that challenged the laws of physics. But speed was only part of the story. The ox cart looked like nothing that belonged in Earth's skies. Its fuselage was a flattened oval that merged seamlessly with triangular wings. Twin vertical fins rose from the rear like alien antennae. The entire aircraft appeared to be carved from a single piece of black metal, with no visible seams, rivets, or conventional control surfaces. Even aviation experts who saw it for the first time questioned whether human beings had actually built such a machine. The arrival of the ox cart program transformed Groom Lake beyond recognition. The facilities that had been adequate for U-2 operations were laughably insufficient for an aircraft that operated at the very limits of technology. Everything had to be rebuilt, expanded, and reimagined to support a machine that redefined what was possible. New hangars rose from the desert floor, structures so large they could house passenger airliners with room to spare. These weren't simple shelters, but sophisticated facilities equipped with environmental controls, specialized lighting, and security systems that made the U-2 era look primitive by comparison. The hangars had to accommodate not just the aircraft, but the army of technicians, engineers, and specialists needed to keep such a revolutionary machine operational. The runway required massive expansion. While the U-2 could operate from the natural lake bed, the ox cart needed prepared surfaces capable of handling extreme heat and stress. Workers poured concrete and installed specialized materials designed to withstand the thermal shock of aircraft moving at unprecedented speeds. The runway grew longer and wider, with additional safety areas to handle emergency landings that might occur at velocities no pilot had ever attempted to survive. But the most complex challenge was fuel. The ox cart didn't run on ordinary aviation gasoline or even standard jet fuel. It required a specialized blend designated JP7, a fuel so exotic that it had to be manufactured specifically for the program. Storage systems, pumping equipment, and handling procedures all had to be developed from scratch. Fuel trucks became mobile laboratories, their crews trained to handle materials that were as much chemistry experiment as aviation fuel. The security expansion matched the technical challenges. The ox cart program brought hundreds of additional personnel to Groom Lake, each requiring clearances, housing, and strict compartmentalization. New dormitories, expanded dining facilities, and recreational areas turned the Spartan test site into something resembling a small city. But it was a city where every resident had signed their life away to secrecy, where casual conversation could constitute treason, and where the wrong question could end a career instantly. The first ox cart test flights revealed just how otherworldly the aircraft truly was. Unlike the U-2, which climbed slowly to extreme altitudes, the ox cart accelerated horizontally until it seemed to simply vanish into the distance. Observers on the ground would hear the initial engine start up, then nothing but silence until the aircraft returned from its mission, appearing suddenly on the horizon like a dark meteor streaking across the desert sky. These test flights created new challenges for maintaining secrecy. The ox cart's speed meant it covered vast distances quickly, often flying over populated areas where its sonic boom and distinctive engine signature could be detected. The aircraft's radar cross-section was unlike anything air traffic controllers had seen, appearing as an impossibly fast, impossibly large contact that violated every known rule of flight. Reports began flooding in from across the western United States. Commercial pilots described seeing triangular objects moving at incredible speeds. Radar operators tracked contacts that accelerated beyond anything in their experience. Most disturbing of all, ground observers reported seeing aircraft that seemed to glow with their own internal light, their heated skin visible even in daylight. To the public, these sightings could only mean one thing: alien visitation. The late 1950s and early 1960s marked the peak of UFO hysteria, and the Oxcart's test flights provided a steady stream of genuinely unexplainable encounters. Witnesses described craft that looked nothing like conventional aircraft, moving at impossible speeds, and displaying flight characteristics that defied known aerodynamics. The Air Force found itself in an increasingly difficult position. Project Blue Book investigators were tasked with explaining away sightings of aircraft whose very existence was among the nation's most closely guarded secrets. Officers would interview witnesses, collect radar data, and file reports on encounters with their own government's most classified aircraft. Some sightings were easier to explain away than others. High-altitude encounters could be attributed to weather balloons or atmospheric phenomena. Distant radar contacts might be dismissed as equipment malfunctions or unusual meteorological conditions, but close-range visual sightings of the Oxcart in full afterburner, its skin glowing with heat and its distinctive triangular shape clearly visible, proved nearly impossible to debunk without revealing classified information. The solution was misdirection on a massive scale. The government began releasing carefully crafted statements about experimental aircraft programs, acknowledging that new planes were being tested while providing no specifics about their capabilities or appearance. This approach allowed officials to explain some unusual sightings while maintaining security around the actual aircraft specifications. By 1964, the Oxcart was ready for operational missions. The aircraft that had terrorized test pilots and baffled radar operators was about to begin flying reconnaissance missions over some of the most heavily defended airspace in the world. Its speed and altitude capabilities made it nearly invulnerable to interception. A spy plane that could photograph enemy installations and be back in friendly airspace before defensive systems could even track it properly. Chapter 7. The day Groom Lake nearly went public. May 1st, 1960, dawned clear and bright over the Soviet Union. Perfect weather for what was supposed to be a routine reconnaissance mission. Francis Gary Powers climbed into his U-2 at Peshawar Air Station in Pakistan, unaware that he was about to trigger the most dangerous moment in Groom Lake's secret history. The mission plan was straightforward. Powers would fly his spy plane across the length of the Soviet Union, photographing missile sites and military installations, before landing safely at Bodo Air Base in Norway. It was the kind of flight the U-2 had completed dozens of times before, exploiting its extreme altitude to stay well above the reach of Soviet interceptors and surface-to-air missiles. But this time, something went wrong. At 9 a.m. Moscow time, flying at 66,000 feet over Sverdlovsk, Powers felt his aircraft shudder. A Soviet SA-2 missile had found its mark, crippling the U-2 and sending it tumbling toward the Earth. Powers managed to parachute to safety, but his aircraft and its sophisticated cameras fell into Soviet hands. At Groom Lake, the news arrived like a lightning bolt through the secure communication channels. The base that had given birth to the U-2 program was suddenly at the center of an international crisis that threatened to expose not just the spy plane, but the entire network of secret facilities that supported American aerial reconnaissance. President Eisenhower faced an impossible choice. The official American position was that no U-2 flights over the Soviet Union had ever occurred. The aircraft were supposedly being used for weather research and atmospheric studies. But now, The Soviets had physical evidence of a spy mission, along with a living pilot who could testify about American intelligence operations. The first instinct was denial. NASA issued statements claiming that a weather research aircraft had gone missing, possibly straying into Soviet airspace due to oxygen system failure that caused the pilot to lose consciousness. It was a plausible cover story that had worked in the past when U-2 flights encountered problems over neutral territory. But Premier Khrushchev had been waiting for exactly this moment. In a dramatic speech to the Soviet parliament, he revealed not only that an American spy plane had been shot down, but that the pilot was alive and talking. Powers had been captured, interrogated, and was providing detailed information about his mission and the aircraft he had been flying. The revelation sent shockwaves through the American intelligence community. If Powers revealed everything he knew about the U-2 program, it wouldn't be just one aircraft's specifications that were compromised. The entire system of secret bases, classified technologies, and covert operations could be exposed. Groom Lake, which had been America's most closely guarded secret for 5 years, might be front-page news within days. Emergency meetings convened in Washington while secure lines burned between CIA headquarters and the remote Nevada base. Officials frantically reviewed what Powers knew and what he might reveal under interrogation. As a pilot, he had intimate knowledge of the U-2's capabilities and limitations. He knew about Groom Lake's role in training and testing. He could describe security procedures, base layout, and personnel he had worked with during his preparation for overseas deployment. At Groom Lake itself, the crisis triggered the most intensive security review in the base's history. Personnel were briefed on new communication protocols designed to contain any potential exposure. Documents were secured or destroyed based on their sensitivity to Soviet intelligence. Most critically, plans were prepared for rapidly evacuating or concealing the most sensitive aircraft and equipment if the base's location became public knowledge. The cover story began unraveling within hours. Khrushchev released photographs of U-2 wreckage that clearly showed sophisticated camera equipment inconsistent with weather research. Soviet technicians had recovered enough of the aircraft to prove it was designed for espionage, not atmospheric studies. The weather balloon explanation became a global embarrassment for the Eisenhower administration. Media attention focused intensively on the U-2 program itself, with reporters scrambling to learn more about the mysterious aircraft and where it had been developed. Aviation journalists began piecing together fragments of information about high-altitude testing, secret facilities, and classified aircraft programs. Several publications came dangerously close to identifying Groom Lake as the U-2's birthplace. The Pentagon launched a desperate disinformation campaign designed to deflect attention away from the Nevada base. Stories were planted suggesting that U-2 development had occurred at other locations. False leads were provided to journalists investigating the aircraft's origins. Officials who knew the truth about Groom Lake were strictly instructed to deny any knowledge of the facility's existence. Meanwhile, the diplomatic crisis escalated rapidly. The planned Paris summit between Eisenhower and Khrushchev collapsed when the Soviet leader demanded an apology for the spy flights and assurance that they would never resume. The U-2 incident had not only exposed American intelligence operations, but had damaged relationships with allies who had provided bases for the spy flights without knowing their true purpose. The most dangerous moment came when Soviet intelligence began investigating the U-2's development history. KGB agents working through diplomatic channels and intelligence contacts started asking questions about American aircraft testing facilities. They had identified Lockheed's Skunk Works as the aircraft's manufacturer, and they were systematically investigating where such a revolutionary plane might have been tested. For several tense weeks, it appeared that Groom Lake's cover might be blown entirely. Soviet satellites were redirected to photograph suspected testing areas throughout the American West. Intelligence analysts in Moscow pored over aerial images, looking for facilities that might have supported U-2 development. The base's remote location and carefully designed camouflage proved crucial during this period, helping it blend into the Nevada desert even under intensive scrutiny. The crisis gradually subsided as international attention moved to other Cold War flashpoints, but the damage to American intelligence operations was severe. The U-2 program was effectively ended, with remaining aircraft reassigned to less sensitive missions. More importantly, the entire philosophy of aerial reconnaissance had to be reconsidered in light of improving Soviet air defenses. At Groom Lake, the incident triggered fundamental changes in security protocols and operational procedures. The base had survived its closest brush with exposure, but officials realized how vulnerable their most sensitive programs remained to unexpected crises. Future projects would need even more sophisticated cover stories and security measures to prevent similar disasters. When Francis Gary Powers was finally released in 1962 as part of a prisoner exchange, his return to the United States marked the end of one era and the beginning of another. The U-2 program that had established Groom Lake's reputation was finished, but the base itself had proven its value under the most severe pressure imaginable. Chapter 8: Strange Nights in the 1970s. The decade began quietly at Groom Lake. The U-2 program had wound down after the Powers incident, and the Oxcart had completed its brief operational career. For the first time in 15 years, the base seemed almost ordinary, a conventional military facility conducting routine aircraft testing under the endless Nevada sky. But those who worked there in the early 1970s began noticing changes, subtle at first, then increasingly difficult to ignore. The sounds were different, the lights behaved strangely, and the aircraft that came and went in the darkness bore little resemblance to anything in the public aviation world. The first signs appeared in the night shifts. Maintenance crews working the graveyard hours reported hearing engine sounds unlike anything they had encountered before. These weren't the familiar whine of jets or the distinctive roar of afterburners. They were deeper, more resonant, sometimes accompanied by what could only be described as a humming that seemed to vibrate through the ground itself. Security personnel, walking their rounds, began reporting unusual atmospheric phenomena, lights that appeared suddenly in the restricted airspace, moving in patterns that violated every known principle of flight. Some hovered motionless for hours before vanishing instantly. Others moved in perfect geometric patterns, forming triangles or straight lines that no conventional aircraft could maintain. The base's own radar operators found themselves tracking contacts that shouldn't have existed, objects that appeared and disappeared without following normal flight paths, signatures that were simultaneously too large and too small, too fast and too slow. Equipment that had worked flawlessly for years began producing readings that made no sense according to established physics. Workers assigned to certain hangars noticed that their clearances had become more restrictive. Areas that had been accessible during the U-2 and Oxcart eras were now completely off limits, even to personnel with top-secret clearances. New security zones were established within the already secure perimeter, creating layers of secrecy that went beyond anything previously implemented. The aircraft themselves, when glimpsed, defied easy categorization. One maintenance supervisor described seeing what he initially thought was a flying wing, but its proportions were wrong for any known design. The craft appeared to be a perfect triangle, with no visible engines or control surfaces. It moved across the hangar floor on some kind of wheeled platform, but its surface seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. These weren't the only anomalies. Pilots returning from test flights described handling characteristics that challenged their understanding of aerodynamics. Aircraft that could hover without visible means of lift. Craft that could accelerate from a standstill to supersonic speeds without the gradual build-up that physics demanded. Most disturbing of all, some reported flying in planes that seemed to anticipate their control inputs, responding to intended commands before the pilot had actually moved the controls. The electromagnetic effects were perhaps the strangest aspect of this new era. Compasses began malfunctioning near certain hangars. Electronic equipment failed in patterns that suggested powerful magnetic fields, yet no conventional sources could be identified. Some workers reported that their wristwatches ran fast or slow depending on which area of the base they were assigned to. Communication systems experienced interference that had never occurred during previous programs. Radio transmissions were disrupted by signals that appeared to have no source. Telephone conversations were interrupted by sounds that technicians couldn't identify, strange harmonics that seemed almost musical but followed no recognizable pattern. The psychological effects on base personnel became increasingly apparent. Workers who had spent years at Groom Lake during conventional aircraft programs began requesting transfers. Exit interviews revealed a consistent theme. The base felt different, charged with an energy that made people uncomfortable in ways they couldn't articulate. Some described dreams that were unusually vivid and strangely similar across different individuals. Recurring images of vast underground spaces, corridors that stretched beyond the limits of the known base, and machinery that operated according to principles they couldn't understand. Sleep disturbances became so common that the base medical officer began prescribing sedatives at unprecedented rates. The local communities surrounding Groom Lake began experiencing their own unusual phenomena. Ranchers reported cattle behaving strangely, gathering in precise geometric patterns, or refusing to graze in areas they had used for generations. Electronic equipment in nearby towns malfunctioned more frequently, and residents noticed unusual lights in the direction of the restricted zone with increasing regularity. Amateur radio operators in the region began picking up transmissions that didn't match any known military communication protocols. The signals were highly organized, but followed patterns that suggested they weren't intended for human operators. Some enthusiasts recorded hours of these transmissions, creating archives of coded communications that defied all attempts at decryption. Aviation activity around the base changed as well. Commercial pilots flying established routes began reporting unusual radar contacts and visual sightings that air traffic controllers couldn't explain. These weren't the high-altitude contacts of the U-2 era or the supersonic signatures of the ox cart. They were something entirely new. Craft that appeared to ignore altitude restrictions, moved at impossible speeds, and vanished from radar without following normal flight paths. The government's response to increased public attention was markedly different from previous decades. Instead of complete denial, officials began acknowledging that experimental aircraft programs were ongoing while providing no specifics about their nature. This shift in strategy suggested that whatever was being tested at Groom Lake in the 1970s was so far beyond conventional technology that standard cover stories were no longer adequate. Project Blue Book, the Air Force's official UFO investigation program, was quietly terminated in 1969, just as reports of unusual activity around Groom Lake were beginning to increase. The timing struck many researchers as suspicious, particularly given that UFO sightings in Nevada were becoming more frequent and more credible. By the late 1970s, Groom Lake had acquired a new reputation among the small community of people who monitored classified aircraft programs. It was no longer just a test facility for advanced conventional aircraft. It had become something else entirely, a place where the boundaries between the possible and the impossible were being systematically explored and expanded. The decade ended with Groom Lake more mysterious than ever. The conventional aircraft programs that had defined its first 20 years were being replaced by projects that challenged fundamental assumptions about flight, physics, and the limits of human engineering. Whatever was being tested in the Nevada desert was preparing to take aerospace technology into realms that would have seemed like pure fantasy just a few years earlier. Chapter 9: The Stealth Revolution Hidden in Plain Sight. The aircraft that rolled out of Hangar 18 at Groom Lake on a moonless night in June 1977 looked like nothing that had ever flown. Its surface was a collection of flat panels and sharp angles, as if someone had tried to build an airplane using only straight lines and geometric shapes. To the handful of engineers and test pilots who saw it that night, the F-117 Nighthawk resembled a crystalline insect more than a conventional aircraft. This was stealth technology in its purest form, the culmination of a secret program that had been developing at Groom Lake since the early 1970s. While the world debated UFO sightings and speculated about alien visitation, the most revolutionary aircraft in history was being perfected in the Nevada desert, hidden behind the same security barriers that had once protected the U-2 and Oxcart programs. The F-117's angular design wasn't aesthetic choice, but mathematical necessity. Every surface was precisely angled to deflect radar waves away from their source, creating an aircraft that was virtually invisible to enemy detection systems. The technology behind this invisibility was so advanced that it bordered on the magical, allowing a full-sized fighter aircraft to appear on radar screens as nothing more than a small bird or a piece of atmospheric debris. The development program, known as Have Blue, had begun as a theoretical exercise in radar signature reduction. Lockheed's Skunk Works, led once again by Kelly Johnson and later by Ben Rich, had been tasked with creating an aircraft that could penetrate enemy airspace without being detected. The challenge seemed impossible using conventional design principles, requiring entirely new approaches to aerodynamics, materials science, and flight control systems. The solution was radical. Instead of trying to make a conventional aircraft invisible to radar, they would design an aircraft specifically around stealth requirements. Every aspect of the F-117's design prioritized invisibility over traditional performance metrics. The result was an airplane that looked like it had been assembled from the wreckage of a crashed UFO. Test flights of early stealth prototypes at Groom Lake created some of the most compelling UFO reports of the late 1970s. The aircraft's angular shape bore no resemblance to any known military or civilian plane. Its flight characteristics were equally unusual, capable of sudden direction changes and unusual approaches that seemed to violate conventional aerodynamics. Ground observers who caught glimpses of stealth test flights described seeing triangular or diamond-shaped objects that moved silently through the night sky. The F-117's engines were buried deep within the fuselage and equipped with specialized exhaust systems that minimized both noise and heat signatures. To witnesses on the ground, the aircraft appeared to glide rather than fly, moving with an otherworldly quiet that added to its alien appearance. The security surrounding the stealth program exceeded even the legendary secrecy of previous Groom Lake projects. Workers were compartmentalized to an unprecedented degree, with individuals knowing only the specific components they were assigned to work on. The aircraft was never displayed in its entirety except during actual flight operations, and even then only to personnel with the highest possible clearances. Manufacturing the F-117 required technologies that pushed the boundaries of what was possible in the late 1970s. The aircraft's skin was composed of radar-absorbing materials that had to be applied with precision, measured in fractions of inches. The slightest imperfection in the surface coating could compromise the entire aircraft's stealth characteristics, turning it from invisible to highly visible on enemy radar screens. Flight testing revealed capabilities that seemed to defy the laws of physics as understood by conventional aviation. The F-117 could approach targets from angles that should have been aerodynamically impossible. Its radar signature was so small that ground controllers sometimes lost track of the aircraft entirely, even when they knew exactly where it was supposed to be flying. Pilots trained to fly the Nighthawk reported experiences unlike anything in their previous aviation careers. The aircraft's fly-by-wire control system meant that the pilot's inputs were interpreted by computers before being translated into actual control surface movements. In essence, the pilot was suggesting what the aircraft should do, while sophisticated software determined how to actually accomplish those maneuvers while maintaining stealth characteristics. The stealth program also revolutionized maintenance and support operations at Groom Lake. The F-117 required specialized hangars with environmental controls that maintained precise temperature and humidity levels. Even minor changes in atmospheric conditions could affect the aircraft's radar-absorbing materials, requiring constant monitoring and adjustment of storage environments. Security personnel at the base were briefed on new protocols designed specifically for stealth aircraft operations. The visual signature of the F-117 was so distinctive that even a brief glimpse could compromise years of development work. Procedures were established for rapidly concealing the aircraft if unauthorized observation was detected, including emergency protocols for aborting test flights if civilian aircraft strayed too close to the restricted airspace. The broader implications of stealth technology extended far beyond military applications. The materials science breakthroughs required for radar absorption found applications in civilian industries. The computational fluid dynamics used to design the aircraft's unusual shape advanced computer modeling capabilities across multiple fields. The manufacturing techniques developed for precision assembly influenced automotive and aerospace production methods. But perhaps the most significant impact was on public perception of advanced technology. The F-117's appearance was so far removed from conventional aircraft design that it challenged basic assumptions about what was possible with human engineering. When glimpses of stealth test flights inevitably leaked into UFO reports, they contributed to a growing belief that either human technology had advanced far beyond public knowledge, or that the observed aircraft were not of human origin at all. The timing of stealth development coincided with the peak period of UFO sightings in the American Southwest. Reports of triangular aircraft, silent flight, and impossible maneuvers matched perfectly with the characteristics of stealth prototypes being tested at Groom Lake. The Air Force found itself in the familiar position of having to investigate UFO reports that were actually sightings of their own classified aircraft. By the early 1980s, the F-117 was ready for operational deployment, though its existence remained classified for several more years. The aircraft that had been developed in complete secrecy at Groom Lake was about to revolutionize air warfare, proving that stealth technology could provide decisive military advantages in real combat situations. The success of the stealth program established Groom Lake's reputation as the premier facility for developing aircraft that challenged conventional understanding of flight. The Nighthawk had proven that human engineering could create aircraft that appeared to violate the laws of physics, setting the stage for even more revolutionary projects that would push the boundaries of technology into realms that seemed more like science fiction than aerospace engineering. Chapter 10: When the Fence Lines Moved. In 1984, a hiker standing on the summit of Freedom Ridge could see clear across Groom Lake, with nothing but 7 miles of desert air between them and the secret base. The view was spectacular, the white alkali surface stretching like a frozen sea, mysterious hangars clustered along the southern edge, and aircraft moving like distant toys across the runway. For UFO enthusiasts and aviation buffs, Freedom Ridge was paradise. Within a decade, that same vantage point would be surrounded by warning signs, motion sensors, and armed patrols. The ridge itself would disappear behind a new security perimeter, swallowed by an ever-expanding ring of restricted territory that pushed observers further and further from the secrets of Groom Lake. The expansion didn't happen overnight. It was a gradual process, a chess game played across the Nevada landscape between those who wanted to watch and those who were determined to remain unseen. Each move by curious observers triggered a countermove by security officials, creating an escalating dance of surveillance and counter-surveillance that continues to this day. The original boundaries around Groom Lake had been established in the 1950s for the U-2 program. The restricted zone encompassed roughly 600 square miles, large enough to contain test flights and provide security buffers against casual observation. For 20 years, these boundaries proved adequate. The few people interested in classified aircraft programs could be easily managed through existing security protocols. But the 1980s brought new challenges. The rise of aviation journalism, the growing UFO research community, and improved photographic equipment meant that more people were actively seeking to observe and document activities at the base. What had once been a remote facility visited only by lost ranchers was becoming a destination for organized expeditions equipped with telephoto lenses and night vision equipment. Freedom Ridge became the focal point of this new attention. At 8,000 feet above sea level, the ridge provided an unobstructed view across the entire Groom Lake complex. On clear days, observers could see individual aircraft on the runway and track vehicle movements around the hangars. More importantly, they could photograph what they saw, creating a visual record of activities that the government preferred to keep invisible. The ridge attracted a diverse group of watchers. Aviation photographers hoping to capture images of classified aircraft, UFO researchers convinced they would document alien technology, journalists investigating rumors of secret programs, former military personnel curious about advanced projects they had heard whispered about but never seen. Each group brought its own expertise and equipment, creating an informal intelligence network that monitored the base around the clock. Whitesides Mountain offered another popular observation point, providing a different angle on the base's operations. From this vantage point, watchers could see the northern approach routes used by the mysterious Janet flights that transported workers to and from the base. They documented the timing of these flights, photographed the unmarked aircraft, and gradually pieced together the logistics of America's most secret facility. The government's response was initially restrained. Security personnel monitored the observers, but generally allowed them to remain on public land as long as they didn't cross into restricted areas. Warning signs were posted, but enforcement was minimal. The philosophy seemed to be that as long as watchers stayed several miles away from actual operations, their presence was more nuisance than threat. But this tolerance had limits. When Aviation Week magazine published detailed photographs of the F-117 taken from Freedom Ridge, everything changed. The images revealed the stealth fighter's distinctive angular shape to the world, confirming rumors about advanced aircraft programs and providing foreign intelligence services with valuable information about American capabilities. The publication of these photographs triggered an immediate security review. Within months, new warning signs appeared around previously accessible areas. Vehicle patrols increased in frequency and intensity. Most significantly, plans were developed to extend the restricted boundary to encompass the most problematic observation points. The land seizure process began quietly in 1984. The Air Force initiated proceedings to withdraw additional public land from civilian access, citing national security requirements. The proposal encompassed nearly 90,000 acres, including both Freedom Ridge and Whitesides Mountain. Local communities were given minimal notice, and public hearings were scheduled in distant locations to minimize attendance and opposition. Opposition to the land withdrawal came from multiple sources. Hikers and campers who had used the area for decades protested the loss of public access. Aviation enthusiasts argued that observing military aircraft from public land was a legitimate activity protected by the First Amendment. Environmental groups questioned the impact of military activities on desert ecosystems and wildlife. The most organized resistance came from the UFO research community. Groups like Citizens Against UFO Secrecy argued that the government was trying to hide evidence of alien technology by preventing public observation of test flights. They organized protests, filed lawsuits, and launched publicity campaigns designed to draw attention to the land seizure. The publicity backfired spectacularly. Media coverage of the protests attracted national attention to Groom Lake, turning a little-known military facility into the subject of widespread speculation. Television news crews traveled to Nevada to film the disputed observation points. Newspaper articles described the mysterious activities that the government was apparently desperate to hide. Despite legal challenges and public opposition, the land seizure proceeded. In April 1985, Freedom Ridge and Whitesides Mountain officially became part of the restricted zone around Groom Lake. The boundaries that had remained stable for 30 years suddenly expanded outward, pushing legal observation points from 7 miles to 12 miles or more from the base. The new security perimeter brought sophisticated enforcement measures. Motion sensors were installed along likely approach routes. Security cameras monitored traditional observation areas. Most visibly, teams of guards in four-wheel drive vehicles began patrolling the expanded boundary, intercepting visitors before they could reach positions with clear views of the base. These guards, quickly nicknamed Camo Dudes by the UFO community, became legends in their own right. Dressed in desert camouflage and driving unmarked white trucks, they would appear within minutes whenever someone approached the boundary. They carried no visible identification and declined to state which agency employed them. Their instructions to visitors were simple: leave immediately or face arrest for trespassing on military property. The psychological impact of the Camo Dudes extended far beyond their actual enforcement capabilities. Their presence created an atmosphere of constant surveillance that made even legal activities feel forbidden. Visitors to the area reported feeling watched even when no guards were visible, contributing to the sense that the entire region was under some form of supernatural protection. But the expansion of boundaries created new problems even as it solved old ones. The longer distances to legal observation points meant that photographic documentation became much more difficult, but it didn't eliminate determined watchers entirely. Instead, it pushed them to develop more sophisticated techniques and equipment. By the turn of the 21st century, the security perimeter around Groom Lake encompassed nearly 1,500 square miles, an area larger than Rhode Island. The boundaries had expanded by more than 200% since the 1950s, creating a buffer zone so vast that activities at the center were effectively invisible to ground-based observation. The expanded perimeter achieved its primary objective of preventing detailed surveillance of base operations, but it came at a cost. The dramatic security measures and repeated boundary expansions had transformed a little-known test facility into an international symbol of government secrecy. Chapter 11: The Lazar Effect and Mass Attention. The phone call came to KLAS television in Las Vegas on a quiet November evening in 1989. The caller identified himself as Dennis, a government scientist who claimed to have worked at a facility connected to Area 51. He said he had a story that would change everything the public thought they knew about UFOs and alien technology. That caller was Bob Lazar, and his decision to go public would transform Groom Lake from a well-kept secret among aviation enthusiasts into the most famous alleged alien base on Earth. Within months of his television interview, the remote Nevada facility would be thrust into international headlines, spawning documentaries, books, and a tourist industry built around the promise of extraterrestrial encounters. Lazar's claims were extraordinary by any measure. He alleged that he had been hired to work at a facility called S4, located south of Groom Lake near Papoose Dry Lake. According to his account, this facility housed 9 recovered alien spacecraft, and his job was to reverse engineer their propulsion systems. He described technology powered by an element that didn't officially exist, craft that could manipulate gravity itself, and a government program dedicated to understanding extraterrestrial technology. The story aired on KLAS TV in November 1989, narrated by investigative reporter George Knapp. The broadcast included interviews with Lazar, who appeared in shadow to protect his identity, describing his alleged experiences working on alien technology. He provided technical details about propulsion systems, described the interior of extraterrestrial craft, and claimed that test flights of these vehicles occurred on Wednesday nights over the Groom Lake area. The public response was immediate and overwhelming. Within days, carloads of UFO enthusiasts were driving to Nevada, hoping to witness the test flights Lazar had described. They gathered on public land near the boundary of the restricted zone, armed with cameras, night vision equipment, and an unshakable belief that they were about to document proof of alien visitation. The Wednesday night gatherings quickly became a phenomenon unto themselves. Groups of 50 to 100 people would congregate at makeshift viewing areas, scanning the skies above Groom Lake for unusual lights or aircraft. Some claimed to see exactly what Lazar had predicted, glowing objects performing impossible maneuvers in the restricted airspace. Others saw nothing but conventional aircraft and distant lights. But the mere possibility of witnessing alien technology was enough to draw visitors from around the world. The tiny communities surrounding the restricted zone found themselves inundated with tourists speaking dozens of languages, all united by curiosity about what might be hidden behind the government's security perimeters. Rachel, Nevada, became the unofficial headquarters of this new tourist industry. The town, which had a permanent population of fewer than 100 people, suddenly found itself hosting thousands of visitors annually. The Little LA Inn, a small restaurant and bar, began catering specifically to UFO tourists, offering alien-themed menu items and serving as an informal information center for visitors seeking the best observation points. Local residents had mixed reactions to the sudden attention. Some embraced the economic opportunities, selling maps, photographs, and souvenirs to eager tourists. Others were concerned about the impact on their quiet rural lifestyle and the strain on limited local resources. The Nevada Highway Patrol reported a dramatic increase in traffic violations and accidents as unfamiliar drivers navigated desert roads while searching for viewing areas. The state of Nevada, recognizing both the tourist potential and the need to manage the chaos, officially designated State Route 375 as the extraterrestrial highway in 1996. Highway signs featuring cartoon aliens were installed along the route, and official tourist materials began promoting the area as a destination for those interested in UFO phenomena. The transformation extended beyond tourism into popular culture. Groom Lake and Area 51 became synonymous with alien conspiracy theories featured in countless movies, television shows, and books. The facility that had successfully maintained its secrecy for 30 years was suddenly the subject of international speculation and media attention. Government officials found themselves in an unprecedented situation. For decades, they had been able to dismiss questions about classified aircraft programs with simple denials or no-comment responses. But Lazar's specific claims about alien technology required a different approach. The more vehemently they denied his allegations, the more credible those allegations appeared to his supporters. The security challenges at Groom Lake multiplied exponentially. The base had been designed to handle occasional intrusions by lost civilians or curious aviation enthusiasts. It was not prepared for organized groups of researchers armed with sophisticated surveillance equipment and determined to document whatever activities they could observe. Perimeter security was dramatically expanded in response to the increased attention. The number of guards was increased, surveillance systems were upgraded, and new warning signs were installed in multiple languages. The famous warnings about use of deadly force, which had previously been seen only by the occasional trespasser, became widely photographed and reproduced in media coverage of the area. The camo dudes, the security personnel who monitored the restricted zone boundaries, became celebrities in their own right. UFO tourists would attempt to photograph these guards, who would in turn photograph the tourists, creating an odd dynamic where both sides were documenting each other. Stories circulated about confrontations between guards and visitors, adding to the mystique surrounding the facility. Janet flights, the unmarked aircraft that transported workers to and from the base, came under intense scrutiny for the first time. UFO researchers began systematically documenting these flights, photographing the planes, and tracking their schedules. The route between Las Vegas and Groom Lake, which had operated in relative obscurity for decades, became one of the most watched flight paths in American aviation. The media attention created a feedback loop that amplified both legitimate research and wild speculation. Serious aerospace journalists found themselves competing with UFO researchers for access to information about the facility. Television documentaries alternated between sober analysis of classified aircraft programs and sensationalized accounts of alien technology, making it difficult for casual observers to distinguish between credible reporting and fantasy. The economic impact extended throughout southern Nevada. Hotels in Las Vegas began marketing packages that included tours of Area 51-related sites. Gift shops sold alien-themed merchandise. Tour companies offered expeditions to observation points around the restricted zone. An entire industry grew up around the possibility that extraterrestrial technology was being studied in the Nevada desert. By the mid-1990s, Area 51 had become one of the most recognizable location names in the world, rivaling landmarks like the Statue of Liberty or the Golden Gate Bridge in terms of international recognition. The transformation from secret test facility to global symbol of government conspiracy theories was complete. The irony was not lost on those who understood the base's actual history. Groom Lake had successfully hidden revolutionary aircraft like the U-2, the A-12 Oxcart, and the F-117 for years or even decades. But once Bob Lazar made his claims about alien technology, the same facility became impossible to keep secret, despite the fact that his allegations have never been substantiated with physical evidence. Chapter 12. Life inside the most secret place on Earth. The alarm clock rings at 4:30 in the morning in a modest Las Vegas apartment. Outside, the city is still dark, the neon signs of the Strip casting their glow over empty streets. But for the man getting dressed in the bathroom, this early hour marks the beginning of another day at the most secret workplace in America. He drives through the quiet city to McCarran International Airport, but not to the main terminal where tourists and business travelers catch their flights. Instead, he heads to a separate facility on the south side of the airport, a cluster of unmarked buildings behind chain-link fences topped with razor wire. This is the home of Janet Airlines, the mysterious carrier that has been transporting workers to Groom Lake since the 1970s. The Janet terminal looks like any small regional airport facility except for what's missing. No airline logos, no destination boards, no public access. Workers show their badges at multiple checkpoints, pass through security screening that exceeds anything in commercial aviation, and wait in a spartanly furnished lounge where conversation is discouraged and cell phones are prohibited. The aircraft themselves are equally anonymous. Boeing 737s painted in a distinctive white and red livery with no airline identification, registration numbers that trace back to the Department of the Air Force. The interiors have been modified to carry more passengers than normal, with seats facing each other to accommodate the commuter loads that fly to Groom Lake each workday. The flight to Groom Lake takes less than an hour, but it crosses more than just physical distance. Passengers watch through small windows as the urban sprawl of Las Vegas gives way to increasingly desolate desert. The Mojave stretches endlessly below, broken only by mountain ranges that cast long shadows in the early morning light. There are no roads, no buildings, no signs of human presence, until the aircraft begins its descent toward a runway that appears suddenly out of the wilderness. Landing at Groom Lake feels like arriving on another planet. The white expanse of the dry lake bed stretches to the horizon, unmarked except for the geometric patterns of runways and taxiways. Hangars and support buildings cluster at the southern end, their desert camouflage making them nearly invisible against the backdrop of distant mountains. The silence is profound, broken only by the sound of engines and the occasional radio transmission. Workers disembark and are immediately sorted into different groups based on their security clearances and project assignments. Buses with darkened windows transport them to various areas of the base, following routes designed to prevent anyone from seeing more than they need to for their specific job. The compartmentalization that defines Groom Lake begins the moment you step off the plane. The work areas themselves reflect this philosophy of need-to-know information sharing. Engineers working on propulsion systems are isolated from those dealing with avionics. Materials specialists have no contact with flight test personnel. Even within the same building, different areas are accessible only to personnel with appropriate clearances, creating a maze of restricted zones within an already restricted facility. Security badges at Groom Lake aren't just identification cards, they're electronic keys that determine every aspect of a worker's experience on the base. The color coding, magnetic strips, and embedded chips control access to specific buildings, elevators, and even individual rooms. Workers quickly learn to check their badge privileges before attempting to enter any area, as unauthorized access attempts are logged and investigated. The psychological impact of working in such an environment is significant. Former workers describe a constant awareness of being watched, monitored, and evaluated. Security cameras are omnipresent, though not always obvious. Conversations are carefully modulated based on who might be listening. Even casual friendships are complicated by the uncertainty of what topics are safe to discuss. Dining facilities on the base serve as one of the few places where different groups of workers might interact, but even these encounters are carefully structured. Seating areas are organized by security level, and conversations that stray into classified topics are quickly redirected by security personnel who monitor these spaces constantly. The food is reportedly excellent, a small compensation for the isolation and restrictions that define daily life at the facility. Recreation opportunities are limited but carefully managed. A small gymnasium, library, and recreation room provide outlets for stress relief, but these facilities are also segregated by security clearance levels. Workers describe playing basketball with colleagues while having no idea what projects those same colleagues work on during their shifts. Transportation around the base follows strict protocols designed to maintain compartmentalization. Workers are assigned specific routes between their quarters and work areas. Deviation from these routes requires special authorization and escort. The base operates an internal bus system, but routes and schedules are classified, and passengers can only board buses that serve areas they're cleared to access. Communication with the outside world is severely restricted. Personal phones are prohibited in most areas of the base. Internet access is limited to specific terminals that log all activity. Even routine personal communications must be cleared through security channels that review content for potential security violations. Workers describe feeling completely cut off from their families and friends during their shifts at the base. The end of the workday brings its own rituals. Workers must pass through security checks that can include searches of personal items, verification of classified materials, accountability, and debriefing sessions about their daily activities. Only then can they board the Janet flights back to Las Vegas, reversing the morning journey that brought them to the world's most secret workplace. The flight home provides a decompression period, though conversations remain muted by security concerns and habit. Workers describe looking down at the lights of Las Vegas as they approach McCarran Airport, feeling a sense of returning to the normal world after a day in a place that operates according to entirely different rules. Family life for Groom Lake workers requires special adaptations. Spouses and children learn not to ask detailed questions about work activities. Social interactions are complicated by the need to avoid discussing employment details that could reveal classified information. Even routine activities like school enrollment for children require special procedures to avoid creating documentation that might compromise security. The long-term psychological effects of working in such an environment vary among individuals. Some workers thrive in the structured, high-security atmosphere, finding purpose in contributing to programs they believe are vital to national security. Others struggle with the isolation, secrecy, and constant surveillance that define life inside the perimeter. Retirement from Groom Lake employment doesn't end the security obligations. Former workers remain bound by secrecy agreements for the rest of their lives. They must report foreign contacts, avoid certain types of employment, and submit to periodic security reviews even decades after leaving the base. The secrets they learned during their careers at America's most classified facility stay with them forever. The workers who have spent their careers at Groom Lake represent a unique population in American society. They have participated in programs that push the boundaries of technology and human knowledge while operating under constraints that few people could understand or tolerate. Their experiences, while largely hidden from public view, have contributed to some of the most significant advances in aviation and aerospace technology. Chapter 13: The Ecology of Secrecy. In the early morning hours, when the last security patrol has passed and the desert settles into silence, a different kind of movement begins across the restricted zone around Groom Lake. A kit fox emerges from its burrow, testing the air with its oversized ears before venturing onto the alkali flats. Somewhere in the distance, a family of wild burros picks its way carefully through the Joshua trees, following paths worn by generations of hooves across terrain that no human foot has touched in decades. This is the other side of America's most secret military facility, a story written not in classified documents or security protocols, but in the tracks left by creatures who have claimed this forbidden landscape as their own. The same security measures that keep humans away from Groom Lake have created something entirely unexpected, one of the most pristine wildlife preserves in the American Southwest. The irony is profound. An area restricted for national security has become a sanctuary for species that elsewhere struggle against human encroachment. The 1,500 square miles of desert surrounding Groom Lake represents one of the largest contiguous areas of undisturbed habitat in Nevada, protected more effectively than many official wilderness areas by the simple fact that trespassing here can result in arrest by federal agents. Desert tortoises, the ancient reptiles that have wandered these valleys for millions of years, have found unexpected refuge within the security perimeter. These creatures, which can live for more than a century and are considered a threatened species throughout much of their range, thrive in areas where armed guards ensure their solitude. Biologists who have studied satellite imagery of the region report tortoise populations that appear healthier and more numerous than in comparable areas open to public access. The tortoises share their protected habitat with creatures both common and rare. Bighorn sheep navigate the rocky slopes of the surrounding mountains, their populations stable in areas where hunting and human disturbance are impossible. These magnificent animals, symbols of the American West, have established territories that extend deep into the restricted zone, following ancient migration routes that predate any human presence in the region. Wild horses roam the valleys in small bands, descendants of animals that escaped from mining operations or were abandoned by early settlers more than a century ago. The Bureau of Land Management, which manages wild horse populations throughout the West, has no access to these herds. The horses exist in a state approaching true wildness, their numbers regulated only by the harsh realities of desert survival rather than human intervention. The plant communities within the restricted zone represent some of the most intact Mojave Desert ecosystems remaining in North America. Joshua trees, those bizarre and wonderful symbols of the high desert, grow in dense forests that have been undisturbed for decades. Some specimens within the security perimeter are estimated to be more than 200 years old, their twisted branches reaching toward the sky above a landscape where the only sounds are wind and the occasional roar of jet engines. Creosote bush, the dominant shrub of the lower Mojave Desert, forms vast uniform stands across the valley floors. Individual plants can live for thousands of years, and some of the colonies within the Groom Lake area may be among the oldest living things on Earth. Their resinous scent fills the air on warm mornings, creating an aromatic backdrop to a landscape that few humans will ever experience. The absence of human activity has allowed natural processes to function without interference. Seasonal washes flow freely during the brief periods when desert rains fill them with rushing water. These ephemeral streams carve new channels and deposit fresh sediments without the complications of roads, buildings, or flood control structures that alter hydrology in developed areas. Rare desert springs within the restricted zone support unique ecosystems that exist nowhere else. These oases, some no larger than bathtubs, sustain specialized plants and animals that depend on permanent water sources. The pupfish and other endemic species that inhabit these springs represent evolutionary lineages that have been isolated for thousands of years, living relicts of ancient climate periods when the desert was much wetter. Bird populations within the security perimeter include species that are declining elsewhere in their range. Golden eagles nest in the remote cliffs, their hunting territories extending across valleys where no human presence disturbs their prey species. Ravens, those intelligent and adaptable birds that often conflict with human activities, find sanctuary in an area where their natural behaviors can flourish without interference. The night sky above the restricted zone is among the darkest in the continental United States. The absence of light pollution allows nocturnal animals to navigate by natural celestial cues that have guided desert wildlife for millennia. Bats emerge from roosts in abandoned mine shafts and natural caves. Their echolocation calls the only sounds breaking the profound silence of desert nights. Seasonal migrations bring additional species into the protected area. Mule deer move through the valleys, following ancient routes between summer and winter ranges. These movements, undisturbed by roads or human settlements, maintain genetic diversity and population health across the broader region. The deer that winter within the security perimeter often show better body condition than those in areas subject to human pressure. The The soil communities within the restricted zone represent some of the most intact examples of biological soil crusts in the Mojave Desert. These living surfaces, composed of cyanobacteria, lichens, and mosses, stabilize desert soils and provide foundation ecosystems for larger plants. In areas open to human recreation, these fragile communities are often damaged by vehicle traffic and foot travel, but within the Groom Lake perimeter they remain undisturbed. The restricted airspace above Groom Lake has created an additional dimension of protection. Military aircraft operating in the area follow strict altitude restrictions that minimize noise impacts on ground-dwelling wildlife. The result is that even the most sensitive species can maintain their natural behavior patterns without the constant stress of low-flying aircraft that affects animals in many other areas. The maintenance requirements for this accidental wilderness area are minimal. Security personnel are trained to minimize their environmental impact, following designated routes and avoiding sensitive habitats whenever possible. The very nature of the security mission means that human presence is kept to the absolute minimum necessary for protection of classified activities. Climate change impacts within the protected area provide insights into how desert ecosystems respond to environmental stress without the complicating factors of human land use. Species populations, plant communities, and hydrological systems within the security perimeter serve as reference conditions for understanding changes occurring in the broader region. The long-term protection provided by military security has created ecological conditions that may not exist anywhere else in the American Southwest. Predator-prey relationships function without human interference. Plant succession follows natural patterns. Water cycles operate according to climatic and geological factors rather than human modifications. This protected status comes with a profound irony. The most militarized landscape in America has become a sanctuary for the very wilderness values that military activities are often perceived to threaten. The security measures designed to hide human technological achievements have created conditions that allow natural systems to flourish in their most pristine form. Chapter 14: Digital Eyes and Satellite Watchers. The first commercial satellite image of Groom Lake appeared on a computer screen in 1999, grainy and pixelated, but unmistakably real. For the first time in the base's 44-year history, ordinary people could see what lay behind the security perimeters from an angle that no earthbound observer had ever achieved. The age of digital surveillance had arrived, and with it, a fundamental shift in the balance between secrecy and transparency. That initial image, captured by the Russian Spin 2 satellite system, showed Groom Lake in remarkable detail. The runway layout was clearly visible, along with several hangars and support buildings that had been the subject of decades of speculation. But more importantly, the image proved that even the most classified facilities on Earth were not invisible to the mechanical eyes orbiting overhead every 90 minutes. The democratization of satellite imagery accelerated rapidly in the early 2000s. Google Earth launched in 2005, putting high-resolution overhead views of virtually any location on the planet into the hands of anyone with an internet connection. Suddenly, the same technology that had once been restricted to intelligence agencies was available to curious teenagers browsing the web during lunch breaks. Groom Lake became one of the most examined locations on Google Earth almost immediately. Forums dedicated to analyzing satellite imagery sprang up across the internet, populated by amateur investigators who spent hours poring over every pixel of the overhead views. These digital archaeologists developed sophisticated techniques for measuring buildings, tracking construction progress, and identifying unusual features that might reveal clues about classified activities. The level of detail available through commercial satellite imagery was impressive and constantly improving. By 2010, resolution had advanced to the point where individual vehicles could be identified and tracked. Aircraft parked on ramps became clearly visible, though their exact types often remained subject to debate among the online analysis community. Enterprising researchers began creating time-lapse sequences by collecting satellite images taken months or years apart. These animations revealed construction projects appearing and disappearing, new buildings emerging from the desert, and changes in the base layout that occurred over time. What had once been impossible to monitor from ground level became visible to anyone willing to spend time scrolling through archived imagery. The base's response to this new form of surveillance was gradual but systematic. New construction increasingly took place inside existing buildings or beneath camouflage structures that concealed activities from overhead observation. Parking areas for sensitive aircraft were relocated to positions where hangars blocked satellite views. Even routine vehicle traffic was modified to minimize the intelligence value that could be extracted from overhead imagery. But satellite surveillance revealed information that ground-based observers had never been able to gather. The true scale of the Groom Lake facility became apparent for the first time, showing extensive underground connections between buildings and revealing the existence of structures that were completely hidden from ground-level view. The base was clearly much larger and more complex than anyone had suspected. Online communities developed increasingly sophisticated analysis techniques. Researchers learned to compensate for image distortion caused by satellite viewing angles. They created detailed maps showing the evolution of base facilities over time. Some developed algorithms for automatically detecting changes between different images, turning the laborious process of visual comparison into a computational exercise. The most dedicated satellite watchers became remarkably skilled at interpreting overhead imagery. They could identify aircraft types from their shadows, estimate building heights from the angles of those shadows, and track the movement of vehicles across the base over periods of months or years. What began as casual curiosity evolved into a form of citizen intelligence gathering that rivaled some government capabilities. Social media platforms amplified the reach of satellite analysis communities. High-resolution images of unusual features at Groom Lake could be shared instantly with thousands of followers. Crowdsourcing allowed dozens of researchers to collaborate on analyzing single images, bringing collective expertise to bear on questions that might stump individual investigators. The psychological impact on base personnel was significant. Workers who had spent their careers in a facility that was completely hidden from external observation suddenly found their workplace visible to millions of internet users. The satellite images didn't reveal classified technical information, but they did strip away the comforting anonymity that had defined Groom Lake for decades. Commercial satellite operators found themselves caught between customer demand for high-resolution imagery and government requests to limit coverage of sensitive facilities. Some images of Groom Lake appeared with deliberate blurring or pixelation, though these attempts at digital camouflage often drew more attention than clear images would have received. The frequency of satellite passes over Groom Lake increased as more imaging systems came online. Multiple satellites from different countries and commercial operators created an almost continuous surveillance capability that made it impossible for the base to predict when it might be photographed from orbit. This constant observation pressure forced fundamental changes in how classified activities were conducted. Nighttime operations, which had once provided cover from ground-based observers, offered no protection from satellites equipped with infrared sensors or synthetic aperture radar systems. These technologies could penetrate clouds and darkness, revealing heat signatures and structural details that were invisible to conventional photography. The global positioning system enabled amateur investigators to coordinate their satellite analysis with ground-based observations. Researchers could identify exact coordinates for features visible in satellite images, then direct ground teams to observation points that provided the best terrestrial views of those same features. The combination of orbital and terrestrial surveillance created unprecedented transparency around base activities. The base adapted by moving the most sensitive activities deeper underground or inside existing structures. New hangars were built with designs that minimized their distinctive signatures when viewed from above. Camouflage techniques evolved from simple desert paint schemes to sophisticated deception measures designed specifically to confuse satellite-based observation. But the most significant change was cultural. The facility that had operated in complete secrecy for nearly half a century was forced to acknowledge that its activities were subject to constant digital scrutiny. Security briefings began, including discussions of satellite surveillance windows. Construction schedules were modified to minimize exposure during periods of known satellite coverage. The democratization of satellite surveillance technology also revealed the limitations of orbital observation. While satellites could show the external features of buildings and track vehicle movements, they could not penetrate inside structures or reveal the specific nature of classified activities. The most important secrets remained hidden, even as the physical infrastructure became increasingly transparent. Amateur satellite analysts developed their own code of ethics regarding the publication of sensitive imagery. Most communities established guidelines about not revealing information that might compromise ongoing military operations, even while maintaining their right to document and discuss facilities that were clearly visible from space. By 2020, satellite surveillance of Groom Lake had evolved into a sophisticated discipline practiced by researchers around the world. High-resolution imagery was available from multiple sources, updated frequently, and analyzed by communities that combined amateur enthusiasm with professional-level expertise. The facility that had once been America's greatest secret had become one of the most thoroughly documented locations on Earth, at least from overhead. The transformation was complete, but paradoxical. While satellite surveillance had made the physical layout of Groom Lake more transparent than ever before, the actual activities conducted there remained as mysterious as they had been in the 1950s. The digital eyes in the sky could see everything and reveal nothing, documenting the containers while leaving their contents forever hidden. Chapter 15: The Lake That Never Sleeps. The construction crews arrived at Groom Lake before dawn on a Tuesday morning in 2023, their vehicles kicking up clouds of alkali dust as they approached the southern edge of the complex. Satellite watchers around the world would notice the activity within hours, posting enhanced images to forums where amateur analysts would debate the purpose of yet another expansion at America's most mysterious facility. This is Groom Lake today, constantly evolving, perpetually expanding, forever adapting to new missions that remain as classified as those conducted here 70 years ago. The ancient dry lake bed continues to serve as the foundation for projects that push the boundaries of what's possible, even as the world watches through digital eyes that never blink. Recent satellite imagery reveals a facility that bears little resemblance to the modest collection of hangars and runways that Kelly Johnson first established in 1955. The base now sprawls across thousands of acres, its infrastructure spreading far beyond the original lakebed into the surrounding valleys and foothills. New hangars appear regularly, some so large they could house passenger aircraft, others built into hillsides with entrances that remain invisible from overhead. The most intriguing recent construction has focused on the underground. Ground-penetrating radar studies conducted by researchers outside the restricted zone suggest extensive tunneling operations that connect surface facilities to subterranean complexes of unknown purpose. These tunnels, if they exist as theorized, would allow for the movement of personnel and equipment completely hidden from satellite surveillance. Contemporary operations at Groom Lake benefit from lessons learned during decades of managing classified programs under public scrutiny. Activities that once took place on the surface now occur within climate-controlled hangars or underground facilities. Aircraft movements follow carefully planned schedules designed to minimize exposure during satellite passes. Even routine maintenance operations are conducted with operational security measures that would have seemed excessive in earlier eras. The Janet flights continue their daily runs between Las Vegas and the base, though the fleet has expanded and modernized over the years. The distinctive white aircraft with red stripes remain a constant presence at McCarran International Airport, their schedules adjusted to accommodate growing workforce requirements at the expanding facility. Passenger loads have increased significantly, suggesting that whatever projects are underway require substantial human resources. Security measures have evolved to address 21st century surveillance technologies. The perimeter detection systems now include sensors that can identify and track individual humans at distances of several miles. Drone detection capabilities protect against the growing threat of unmanned surveillance aircraft. Most significantly, electronic warfare systems can reportedly interfere with satellite communications and GPS navigation for unauthorized aircraft that stray too close to the restricted airspace. The workforce at contemporary Groom Lake represents a new generation of aerospace professionals comfortable with digital age security protocols. These engineers, technicians, and pilots have grown up with smartphones and social media, requiring entirely different approaches to information security than previous generations of classified workers. Training programs now include extensive modules on avoiding digital signatures and managing electronic communications in ways that don't compromise operational security. Current speculation about Groom Lake activities focuses on several areas of advanced aerospace technology. Hypersonic aircraft development appears likely, given the facility's history with high-speed flight testing and recent advances in this field by potential adversaries. Unmanned aerial systems of unprecedented capability may be under development, explaining the need for expanded ground control facilities visible in satellite imagery. Space-related projects represent another probable area of focus. The base's remote location and restricted airspace make it ideal for testing spacecraft or spaceplane concepts that require absolute secrecy. Recent construction of what appears to be specialized fueling facilities suggests operations involving exotic propellants that might be used for space access vehicles. The most persistent rumors continue to center on propulsion technologies that seem to defy conventional physics. Reports from reliable sources describe test flights of aircraft that exhibit flight characteristics unlike anything in the known inventory of American aerospace capabilities. These accounts, while impossible to verify independently, maintain the base's reputation as a location where the impossible becomes routine. Artificial intelligence integration represents a likely focus of current programs. Modern military aircraft increasingly rely on AI systems for navigation, targeting, and autonomous operation. Groom Lake's secure environment would be essential for testing AI capabilities that might provide significant military advantages if kept secret from potential adversaries. Materials science breakthroughs continue to be associated with activities at the base. Advanced composites, metamaterials, and nanotechnology applications all require extensive testing in controlled environments. The specialized laboratory facilities visible in recent satellite imagery suggest research programs that extend far beyond conventional aircraft development. The electromagnetic signature management that began with stealth technology has evolved into comprehensive approaches to controlling how aircraft appear to various sensors. Contemporary programs likely include systems that can actively manipulate their radar, infrared, and visual signatures in real time, creating aircraft that can appear to be something completely different from what they actually are. International cooperation represents a new dimension of Groom Lake operations. Allied nations with advanced aerospace capabilities may now participate in selected programs conducted at the facility. This cooperation, while still highly classified, would explain some of the foreign personnel movements detected by observers monitoring the base's transportation systems. The COVID-19 pandemic created new operational challenges for Groom Lake, though the base's isolation and strict access controls provided natural protection against the virus. Modified work schedules, enhanced medical screening, and adjusted transportation protocols were implemented while maintaining the security requirements that define operations at the facility. Remote work capabilities, impossible for most classified programs, forced innovative approaches to maintaining project continuity while ensuring personnel safety. Climate change impacts are affecting the physical environment around Groom Lake, though the base itself remains well adapted to desert conditions. Rising temperatures and changing precipitation patterns may influence facility design and operational procedures, but the basic advantages of the location remain unchanged. Enhanced cooling systems and modified construction materials help facilities cope with increasingly extreme desert conditions. Future challenges for Groom Lake operations include managing continued expansion while maintaining security in an age of ubiquitous surveillance. Commercial satellite constellations now provide near real-time coverage of any location on Earth, making traditional concealment increasingly difficult. The facility must evolve new approaches to secrecy that account for technological capabilities that didn't exist when the base was established. The next generation of classified aircraft programs will likely push even further into realms that challenge our understanding of what's possible with human technology. Whether these capabilities derive from conventional aerospace engineering or represent genuinely revolutionary breakthroughs remains one of the enduring mysteries associated with Groom Lake. Advanced propulsion concepts, quantum technologies, and materials that exist only in theoretical form may all play roles in future programs. Public interest in the facility shows no signs of diminishing. New generations of researchers continue to monitor the base using increasingly sophisticated tools and techniques. Social media platforms provide instant global distribution for any unusual observations, ensuring that even minor changes in base operations receive immediate attention from the worldwide UFO and aviation communities. The balance between operational security and public transparency continues to evolve. Government acknowledgement of the base's existence in 2013 opened new possibilities for limited disclosure about historical programs while maintaining protection for current operations. Future revelations may follow similar patterns, revealing past activities while preserving the secrecy essential for ongoing missions. Educational institutions now study Groom Lake as a case example in managing classified programs under public scrutiny. Business schools examine the logistics of operating secure facilities. Engineering programs analyze the technological achievements that emerged from the base. Even sociology departments investigate the cultural impact of such extreme secrecy on surrounding communities. As night falls over the Nevada desert, the ancient lake bed settles into the profound silence that has defined this place for millennia. Security patrols begin their rounds along perimeters that stretch beyond the horizon. In climate-controlled hangars scattered across the complex, projects continue that may reshape our understanding of flight, space, and the limits of human technological achievement. The questions that have surrounded Groom Lake for 7 decades remain as compelling today as they were when the first U-2 took off from this remote runway. What moves through the darkness above this forbidden landscape? What technologies are being perfected in facilities hidden from public view? And what discoveries await in programs that must remain secret until their revelations can no longer be contained? The lake that never sleeps continues its eternal vigil, holding secrets that span from the early days of the Cold War to missions that may extend far into the future. Whether those secrets involve advanced human technology, recovered materials from unknown sources, or something else entirely, they remain locked behind security barriers that have only grown stronger with time. In the pre-dawn darkness, when the desert wind carries only the whisper of sand against metal and the distant hum of machinery, Groom Lake maintains its silent promise. Some secrets are worth keeping, some boundaries are worth defending, and some mysteries are worth preserving for future generations who may be better equipped to understand their significance. Thank you for listening to us. Rest well, and we'll see you in the next episode.